Mr. Krishnamurti, in our last conversation, we were beginning to talk about consciousness and its relation to death in the context of living as a total movement.
Yes.
And we even touched on the word reincarnation toward the end when we had to draw our conversation to its conclusion. I do hope that we can begin to continue there.
You see, one of the factors in death is the mind is so frightened. Mm-hmm. We are so frightened of that very word, and nobody talks about it. I mean, it isn't a daily conversation. It is something to be avoided, something that is inevitable. For God's sake, keep it as far away as possible.
We even paint corpses to make them look as though they're not dead.
That's the most absurd thing.
Yes. Mm.
Now, what we are discussing, sir, is, isn't it, the understanding of death, its relation to living, and this thing called love.
Mm-hmm.
One cannot possibly understand the immensity, and it is immense, what this thing called death, unless there is real freedom from fear.
Mm-hmm.
That's why we talked some time ago about the problem of fear. Without really freeing the mind, unless the mind frees itself from fear, there is no possibility of understanding the extraordinary beauty, strength, and the vitality of death.
That's a very, very remarkable way to put it. The vitality of death. And yet, normally we regard it as the total negation of life.
That's right. So, I mean, if we are inquiring into this question of death, fear must be completely non-existent in us. Then I can proceed. Then I can find out what death means. We've touched a little bit on reincarnation, the belief that is maintained throughout the East,
mm-hmm.
which has no reality in daily life. It's like going to church every Sunday and being mischievous for the rest of the 6 days. So if a person who is really serious, really attentive, goes into this question of death, he must understand what it means, the quality of it, not the ending of it. That's what we're going to a little bit discuss.
Mm-hmm.
The ancient Egyptians, the pharaohs and all the first dynasty till the 18th and so on, they prepared for death.
Mm-hmm.
They said, we will cross that river with all our goods, with all our chariots, with all our belongings, with all our property, with all our... And therefore their caves, their tombs were filled with all the things of their daily life. Corn, you know all that. So living was only a means to an ending, dying.
Mm-hmm.
That's one way of looking at it. The other is reincarnation, which is the Indian Asiatic outlook. And there is this whole idea of resurrection of the Christians. Reborn, carried by Gabriel angel and all that to heaven, and you will be... Now, what is the fact? These are all theories, suppositions, beliefs, and non-facts. I mean, suppose we born, Jesus come out of the grave, resurrected physically. That is just a belief. There were no cameras then. There were no 10 people say, yes, I saw it. It's only somebody imagined. We'll go into that a little later. So there is this living and preparing for death, is the ancient Egyptians did. Then there is the reincarnation, then there is the resurrection. Now, if one isn't frightened, you follow, sir, deeply, then what is death? What is it that dies? Apart from the organism. The organism may continue, if you look after it very carefully, for 80 or 90, 100 years. If you have no disease, if you have no accidents, if there is way of living sanely, healthily, perhaps you last 100 years or 110 years. And then what? You follow, sir? You live 100 years. For what? For this kind of life? Fighting, quarreling, bickering, bitterness, anger, jealousy, futility, a meaningless existence. It is meaningless existence, as we are living now.
And in terms of our previous remarks, this is all the content of consciousness.
That's right.
Yes.
Now, so, what is it that dies? And what is it one is frightened of? You follow? Mm-hmm. What is it one is frightened of? Death. Losing the known, losing my wife, losing my house, losing all the things I've acquired, losing this content of consciousness.
Mm-hmm.
So, can the content of consciousness totally be emptied? You follow, sir?
Yes, I do.
Which is the living. The dying is the living. When the content is totally emptied.
Mm-hmm.
That means no attachment. It is not a brutal cutting off, but the understanding of attachment, the understanding of dependency, the understanding of acquisition, power, possession, anxiety, all that. The emptying of that is the real death. And therefore, the emptying of consciousness means the consciousness which has created its own limitation by its content comes to an end. I wonder.
Yes. Yes, yes, you have. I was following you very carefully, and it occurred to me that there is a radical relation between birth and death. That the two, when they are looked upon as moments in a total cycle, are not grasped at the depth level that you're beginning to speak about.
Yes, sir.
Am I correct?
That's correct.
Good. Please do go on.
So, death becomes a living when the content of consciousness, which makes its own frontier, its own limitation, comes to an end.
Mm-hmm.
And that this is not a theory, not a speculative intellectual grasp, but the actual perception